to read for the first time from my new nonfiction book, What is to Come? The Solution to the Communion Enigma, where I am going to describe exactly what I remember, and you can compare it to what Duncan remembers. And my question for you is this, before we get started. Do you remember anything? Above all, do you have any documentation that would help us pin this down? The victims of the plutonium experiments were given an apology by the United States government and compensated for their suffering. More recently, there have been official admissions of other horrendous experiments involving things like the methodical poisoning of people back in the 1950s. This happened. It all happened. And the one thing that has not been owned up to yet is what was done to children. It was done, though. There's no question in my mind about it. I have a childhood friend who is a very, very respected individual with an international reputation who remembers the time that two people from the Air Force came to his home and tried to get his parents to enroll him in such a program. It's time for there to be a proper investigation of this whole area. Many of the stories we tell of our childhood experiences sound completely crazy, but we were children. We had no points of reference. We were at sea, in a dark and stormy sea. So if you can help in any way, write Whitley@Strieber.com. And now we're going to go on in just a moment to Duncan OFinioan. But before we do, I want to remind you the Dreamland Festival is coming up this June. If you'd like to come, go to unknowncountry.com, look to the right side of the homepage, and click on the Dreamland Festival sell point. We'd love to see you there.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland. This is the edge of the world.
Robert Duncan OFinioan is an author and martial artist. Born in 1960, he was taken at a young age by his parents and delivered to a secret government program known as Project Talent, a sub-project of the notorious MK Ultra program that was exposed in the mid-70s by the Church Committee after an attempt was made to destroy all records of this program. In fact, 20,000 documents remained, but they were only the tip of the iceberg. The program used severe trauma to split his personality into several alternate personalities, one of whom was trained and enhanced to become a super soldier known as Omega Unit 197. It was only as an adult, after years of missing time, blackouts, odd experiences, and terrifying nightmares, that a car accident restored some of Duncan's memories of involvement in these secret programs. Duncan has also recently learned of the existence of 3 distinct other personalities in addition to 197. Today, Duncan continues to be an advocate of bringing light to these programs and getting them stopped. No child should be tortured against their will, and certainly not by programs run by the very people who are supposed to protect us. Duncan, welcome to the program, and I have to say from the outset, I could not agree with you more. This is not going to be a hostile or skeptical interview, folks, and you'll find out why over the course of our conversation. Welcome to the show, Duncan.
Thank you, sir. It's my pleasure.
Now, should I call you Duncan or Robert?
Duncan's fine. That's what everybody knows me by.
Okay. All righty, great. So, Duncan, you say that you started out in this at the age of 6. How did that come about? Do you remember?
Yeah, I was taken to, of all places, a hardware store, which was downtown, the little town that nearby from where we lived at that time. And there were several other kids in the back room, and they were, everybody was being given the same test. We had to put puzzle pieces together. And in the beginning, when I first started coming forward with all of this, we were under the assumption and fully believed that the test was to put the puzzle together, to recognize certain aspects of it and to recognize what the finished product looked like. We don't think that's what the test was now. And we have had a lot of evidence come forward that we think proves this theory. What the actual test was to see who could be a psychic receiver. And one of the reasons that we say that is the lady who was administering the test stood behind me the entire time that I was taking the test. And then later on, when I was about early 20s, I was bonded with who was my partner, who is a psychic sender. And that just goes to show how long range some of these projects really can be. Nearly 20 years later, I'm finally bonded with a psychic sender. And we worked as a team, her being the sender, myself being the receiver. And what that did is gave us nonverbal communication on a battlefield in combat. And it doesn't take a military genius to realize what tremendous advantage having something like that could be.
Now, when you say on the battlefield, were there specific instances in your life when you were on a battlefield and experiencing this communication?
Oh, yeah. We were deep in Central and South America several times on operations, and my partner would physically be on a high position, sometimes in a tree, sometimes an outcropping, what have you, being hid. And she would transmit to me targets. And what I would receive were images like pictures. We called it picting. And it took us years and years of training and practice to be able to make this instantaneous and for me to nearly instantaneous to decipher what each image I received was.
Why not just use radios?
Well, one of the things is, remember, we were an experiment. And I would say half, if not more, of the things that we actually did were just part of the experiment. And why not radios? Well, radio transmissions can be intercepted. They make noise. Just a lot of reasons for that without going into a lot of detail. But I still say to this day the main reason was we were an experiment.
I have an implant in my left ear, which my listeners know all about. They've heard it described many times. I'll just very briefly give you the circumstances in which it appeared. It was in May of 1989. I was awakened in the middle of the night by noises outside. As I woke up, I heard a male voice outside, the windows were open, say, "Condition red." And there were two people in the room, already in the bedroom, a man and a woman. They rushed to the bedside, immobilized me in a way that I don't understand, and applied waves of pressure to the left side of my head. I have this object that has been, an attempt has been made to remove it surgically. It's very sophisticated. It's a combination of biology and metal mixed together, and it can move. And when the surgeon attempted to remove it, it went down into the lobe of my ear, moved a couple of inches down into the earlobe. So it's very sophisticated. There was no scar where it was put in, except the surgical scar made when the attempt was made to remove it. The surgeon and the pathologist thought it was the strangest thing they'd ever seen. It is not natural. It is definitely a piece of technology. Now, I'm very curious to know if you know anything about things like that.
Yeah, I have several of those.
What is their purpose?
Well, I've been told several different reasons for those. I have one that is behind my right ear. I have no clue what it is. I have 3 in my left hand, 1 in my right shoulder, 1 in the prefrontal lobe next to the pineal gland, and 1 in my right hip. And just as you, there's no scar where they were put in. They show up on X-ray. The one in my right shoulder does move, and it itches constantly. I cannot remember a day when this thing wasn't itching. And I saw 3 surgeons to try to have the one in my left hand removed, and all 3 refused.
Why did they refuse?
Well, one said that with the location that it was, I would probably stand a good chance of losing the use of my left index finger.
Oh, I see.
And the other 2 just didn't want. One actually laughed about it, and he said, well, it's not causing you pain, and it wasn't bothering you when you didn't know it was there. Now that you do, it's bothering you, so I see no reason to remove it just because it bothers you.
Yeah. Well,
kind of an asinine comment, but,
I was very careful in my case to tell the surgeon that the thing was getting irritated when I slept on it, so he had a reason to remove it. I don't know if he'd try again, though, after what he found. Well, let's now go on to you're obviously, you're not the only person who has come forward with stories like this. And
right.
I'm working on a new book about my life called A New World, which is got a lot of material about what happened to me as a child. And I think there were a lot of us involved. In fact, I know there were because of a particular witness I'm aware of whose when he was a boy, he was literally in the room when his parents were approached by a couple, a man and a woman from the Air Force, who tried to recruit him into a program that sounds very much like these programs. Of course, they appealed to their patriotism. He was 10 years old, but he remembers it vividly. And he said, I just had the most terrible feeling about these people. And I was so relieved that when they left, my parents did too. And my mother and dad said, if you ever see them around again, call the police immediately. And they were dressed in Air Force uniforms.
Right, Air Force Blues.
Yeah, Air Force Blues. And they were trying to recruit him into a program at the very same air base where I had gone through this 10 years earlier or 5 years earlier as a little tiny child. A program so severe that it caused my immune system to shut down when I was 11. When I was 7, I ended up being treated in a military hospital for gamma globulin deficiency. And
okay, if you don't mind my asking, how old are you?
I'm 65.
Okay. A lot of people don't know this. It's not common knowledge like a lot of the projects that, we'll be talking about. The project that I was in when I was taken in is commonly known as first generation. And that's true to a point. However, there was a subsequent generation that took place in the 1950s.
Well, that would have been this.
Right. Now, the project itself was a failure.
Was a what?
It was a failure. The project failed.
It did fail. I would agree with you there.
But there was enough individual successes to move forward with it.
See, I'm not like you in that I don't have missing time periods in my life at all. In other words, something was done to me clearly, and there's no question about it. Some other children I knew who were in the program were destroyed by it. Mentally, they were completely ruined. and never lived proper lives. But I think you're right. I think it did end. I think it did fail. I think I was out of it by 1954. And so, but go ahead and let's talk more about your project. I'm just sort of trying to gain a little perspective here. Tell us about exactly what happened to you that you remember when you were in the project being trained.
Well, when it started, when I essentially passed the test, 'cause I remember the lady, who had a very German accent, by the way.
How interesting, because the man I dealt with had a German accent too.
But it was this lady and a gentleman that was in the back room giving all us kids this test. She looks at the guy and, and smiles and says, "We've got one." Okay, now I was actually literally physically offered a cup of Kool-Aid. I mean, that is the most ironic statement I can ever make. I was actually offered a cup of Kool-Aid. I have to
say I remember the Kool-Aid very well. Go ahead.
And I drank it, and the last thing I remember is getting very sleepy. And for years, my next cognitive memory was being about 9.5, 10 years old. So I lost all those years where I had no memory. And it can be very shocking to your system to realize that, oh my God, I've lost 2 years, 3 years, what have you. And that is in a lot of cases, and it was in my case, where you had family members who were involved with these programs as well, and their job, whether knowingly or not, was to keep your life in turmoil. And in my case, it was a grandmother. And then on through, I really didn't have any more long-term missing time until I was about 14. And then I remember what happened. My dad got a visitor from an old friend of his who was in the CIA, and he came up to the farm to visit one day. And 3 days later, I was gone. The next thing I remember, I'm 18, studying the driver's manual for my driver's license. So all those years were gone. And then subsequently, I started losing from a few days to a few weeks, 19, 20, 21, 22, on in there. And then it kind of stopped for a while, and it became less and less. And then after I had the car accident, which we know now wasn't an accident, it was an arranged accident. When I had an MRI of my neck, for whatever reason, the cranial implant didn't like the MRI machine. And it caused at least a portion of that chip's function to go haywire. And it allowed that wall to drop that kept the memories of my memories and the alternate personalities' memories. It kept them separated. Well, when that wall came down, all these memories just started instantly to flood in. And I literally went nuts for a while.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
I mean, I was nuts for a while. But I had all my life been plagued with horrific nightmares, reoccurring dreams, what they call daydreams, where you would just zone out and be somewhere else. Well, when this happened with the MRI machine, man, I knew those weren't dreams. Those were real events that I was actually reliving.
Now, what are some of them that you recall?
I remember the technique that was used to fracture my personality when I was probably about 7.
We're going to have to take a little break. I am sitting here riveted, and I'm long past the time for the first break. So we'll take a break here, and we'll be right back with Duncan OFinioan. We're talking to Duncan OFinioan about some, to say the least, extraordinary things. You can reach Duncan at DuncanOFinioan.com, and you can get his book by clicking on the book in the Dreamland Unknown Country store on our website, and that'll take you right through to his website where you can buy his book. And you can follow his activities on DuncanOFinioan.com and get through to his blog from there as well. Now, Duncan, before we left the air, you were just about to tell us how your personality was fractured as a child.
Well, they use different techniques on different individuals. I have had other people that I am in close contact with that were in Generation 1, 2, and 3. I haven't met anyone yet that was from Generation 4, or now, from what I'm told, we're in Generation 5. But with me, personally, they used physical trauma with the emotional trauma. Basically, what they started with me, and everyone needs to understand, this was something that did not take place all at once. This took place over many weeks, many months to a year, and then subsequent conditioning to be able to trigger that personality at will went on and on and on. Okay, this was many years purpose here. But what they started out with me was strapping me naked to a wooden chair. And when I say strapped, I mean strapped. I was strapped at the ankles, the knees, the thigh, the waist, the chest, the head, and everywhere. And they started out with just basically just slapping me around in the chair. And I'm 6, 7 years old. And then I know what waterboarding feels like. Except in my case, they just took a water hose and would spray it in my face. And during this time, I'm hearing, like coming over a loudspeaker, this monotone, routine voice. And this would progress. And then, over time, they began to insert needles underneath my fingertips. It'd be 1, and then a couple of days later, there would be 2, until finally there was 10. And after it progressed to the point where I had all needles under all 10 fingertips, then they hooked electrodes to the needles, those alligator clips. And it was hooked up to a little green box about 2 foot by 2 foot, had a meter on it, a gauge meter on it. And they turned the dial up and flipped on the switch. And that put an electric current through me. And I remember being 7, asking them to just let me die. And, of course, they did not. And you reach a point with this to where you either fracture off into an alternate personality to survive, or you die. And in 1966, the group that I was taken in with, more than half did not survive the initial process. And there are some days when I think they were actually the lucky ones. And once that personality was fractured off, that's the one that they took and they gave all the advanced training to, and it has all the knowledge and was used on different assignments. And over time, it became easier to institute a different personality, and then another different personality, and then another different personality. I have 3 working personalities. As you said, Omega Unit 0197 is what we call the combat unit. The other personality is, we lovingly call him the professor. And when I switch into professor mode, you can tell it instantly. I lose the hillbilly accent, and my vocabulary expands exponentially, and I sound like a college professor talking. And the other personality we just call the berserker. That personality is more animal than human. That we equate the berserker personality to, say, a doomsday weapon, a last resort personality. And that one has only manifested once that I'm aware of in front of a witness. The other personality that we're aware of is a small boy of about 7. And we think, and we have talked to psychologists about this, and they have told us that that personality is actually me at the age when I split off. It's personality that just never grew up. That personality will always be a 7-year-old frightened to death little boy. Now, do I have more? I hope not. And I really don't think I do, because they have nothing else has ever manifested.
You make me think of, I think that a lot of people have been involved in this. And there was a book called The Plutonium Experiments. It won the Pulitzer Prize a few years ago. The United States government officially apologized to the victims of this. And there has been no book about this group of people, which I'm almost certain I have to say about us.
Right.
And it seems there was testimony before that very commission by Claudia Mullen, who was a survivor, just like you and like me, and that testimony was ignored. We're going to talk more in just a moment. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. I'm talking to Duncan OFinioan, his website, DuncanOFinioan.com. You can get his book from unknowncountry.com. It'll take you through to the order point on his website. If you click on the book on the right-hand side of the homepage, of our homepage, you can click through to his website from the Dreamland show description as well. But do visit him and get to know him, and I think a lot of us who have been through programs like this in varying forms. I must say, by the way, Duncan, that what you describe as being done to you was I was far less ill-treated. We were primarily stuffed into a painted black, what I guess must have been a telephone booth. It seemed huge at the time, but, I was a little tiny child. Dozens of us were stuffed in there in a claustrophobic nightmare, and horrible, loud screaming was played for what seemed to me to be years, eternities. And then we were brought out, and my memories of all of this are extremely vague. But one of the things you just said before we left the air struck me forcefully. You discovered this little child inside yourself. When I was under hypnosis by Dr. Donald Klein, after the close encounter of the third kind I had in 1985, at one point he asks me my age, and my voice pipes up, "I'm 12," in this little Texas voice I didn't even know was still inside me. So it does happen.
It does.
Do you know anyone else in this who you are sure was in the program? Do you remember anyone who might have been with you, for example?
Absolutely. I'm in contact with a couple, as a matter of fact. When I talk about my partner, and on my blog especially, when I talk about Axe, which was her code name, we were in this project together. I was first generation, she was second generation. and she is the person that we were bonded together. Now, she and I both have identical surgical scars from the coccyx going up about 4 vertebrae. And we have memories of having wires attached in that area in the spine, and we were attached together via the wires. We still don't know exactly what that was, but we remember it.
We were given intelligence tests. You were given psychic tests, so the program was progressing, obviously.
Yeah.
Now, the question I have about it is this: did it extend beyond soldiers? Because I certainly, while I have certain skills which are peculiar, I don't know if I still possess this skill, but throughout most of my life, I've been an absolutely extraordinary shot. And yet I have no memory of ever being trained on any weapon at all.
Right.
But, you know, I could take a little... Go ahead.
I love that. I love your question.
Yeah,
and
please.
I have a perfect way to answer it. Think of Project Talent as going to school. We were all of us who survived the initial process were trained in the same things. We all received the same basic martial arts training, firearms training, marksmanship training, the physical conditioning, on and on. Equate that to elementary school. As you go to high school, as you're getting older, you start finding out you're better at some things than other things, and you're allowed to take electives. So that's when we were starting to branch off with more individualized training. Then you move on to college, and that's where you train for your career. It's the same thing with Project Talent. When we were first taken in, we were all taught the same thing. As we got older, say high school level, they began to branch us off as more individuals. And then once we became older, and I'm not just saying age, I mean, we may have just been 14 or 15, but going to that college level, they know what we're going to be the best at, and that's the areas that they put us in. Okay, like I was not suited to be the remote viewer that sat in the darkened room and found targets. That just wasn't what I was good at. But I was damn good on the battlefield. And that's where they put me. That's why they gave me the augmentations, the physical enhancements, and on, and that's where I was put. So what your question ties in, that, they would take your individual skills and take them to the max, okay, depending on what you were good at. So that way the projects and the experiments not only grew, but branched out like limbs on a tree and formed this, what I call the big umbrella, with the whole initial project still being the tree trunk. Does that make sense?
That does. And, you know, I have to tell you, in the past few years, I've begun to notice people in the political world, both in the political media and in political office, who use the same groups of buzzwords and seem to be somehow or another connected, not even ideologically. It crosses ideological boundaries. And I'm just wondering if some of these people haven't been injected into that world as well.
I have no doubt. Probably not to the degree that we were. But remember, as the generations that we all came from moved forward, their techniques improved.
I can see that between the memories that the two of us have.
Exactly. See, from what I understand now, the real severe physical torture that we went through isn't even necessary. Now they just put the chip in and boom, you belong to them.
I wonder what would happen if you had one of your chips taken out. I mean, if you were successful at that. I've been thinking about getting mine taken out because, I'm beginning to think that it's, on the one hand, it seems useful in certain ways. On the other hand, I'm getting kind of tired of it.
Well, for me, that's a two-edged sword. One of the things that I do know is, I'm implanted from really from head to the cossack in the hip area.
Yeah.
And these chips function simultaneously and act as an internal bodysuit. Now, in all honesty, the car accident that I had basically finished off my neck. My neck and spine had been severely injured in an aircraft crash several years before. And the car accident literally just finished off my neck. I'm not even supposed to be able to walk right now. And when doctors look at x-rays of my neck, they're astonished. They're like, how in the world did you even walk in here?
I have a fused vertebra in my neck, which was surgically fused according to the doctors who have seen it, and I had a lot of neck pain for a long time because of it. One of the doctors simply refused to treat me because he said, if you won't tell me where this surgery was done, I can't treat you. I have no memory of the surgery whatsoever.
Oh, absolutely. I know that routine. I have gone to doctors with severe lower back pain, and they would examine and they would say, hey, whoa, when did you have your surgery? And that's when I first found the scar. I'm like, what surgery? They go, man, you've got the most perfect surgical scar back here I've ever seen.
I've heard those very words.
Yeah, and
how
what's
weird.
News to me.
Very, very frightening.
I didn't know about it.
No, neither did I. Listen, we have come to the end of our time together on Dreamland. But can you stay with us, and we have another program that I can just continue this on. Can you do that for another half hour, say? Do you have
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, good. Well, Dreamland listeners, I would like to thank you very much for having been with us. I think you've heard something truly extraordinary today, and if you're a subscriber to UnknownCountry.com, we're going to continue on with this discussion in the subscriber section. Dreamland listeners, thank you very much for being with us, and don't miss a single week of Dreamland. You don't find this anywhere else. There's no other place in the world where the host and the guest are going to be talking this way together about a subject like tell of our childhood experiences sound completely crazy. But we were children. We had no points of reference. We were at sea, in a dark and stormy sea. So if you can help in any way, write Whitley at Strieber.com. And now we're going to go on in just a moment to Duncan OFinioan. But before we do, I want to remind you the Dreamland Festival is coming up this June. If you'd like to come, go to UnknownCountry.com, look to the right side of the homepage, and click on the Dreamland Festival sell point. We'd love to see you there.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland. This is
to read for the first time from my new nonfiction book, What is to Come? The Solution to the Communion Enigma, where I am going to describe exactly what I remember, and you can compare it to what Duncan remembers. And my question for you is this, before we get started. Do you remember anything? Above all, do you have any documentation that would help us pin this down? The victims of the plutonium experiments were given an apology by the United States government and compensated for their suffering. More recently, there have been official admissions of other horrendous experiments into several alternate personalities, one of whom was trained and enhanced to become a super soldier known as Omega Unit 197. It was only as an adult, after years of missing time, blackouts, odd experiences, and terrifying nightmares, that a car accident restored some of Duncan's memories of involvement in these secret programs. Duncan has also recently learned of the existence of 3 distinct other personalities in addition to 197. Today, Duncan continues to be an advocate of bringing light to these programs and getting them stopped. No child, involving things like the methodical poisoning of people back in the 1950s. This happened. It all happened. And the one thing that has not been owned up to yet is what was done to children. It was done, though. There's no question in my mind about it. I have a childhood friend who is a very, very respected individual with an international reputation who remembers the time that two people from the Air Force came to his home and tried to get his parents to enroll him in such a program. It's time for there to be a proper investigation of this whole area. Many of the stories we
The Edge of the World.
Robert Duncan OFinioan is an author and martial artist. Born in 1960, he was taken at a young age by his parents and delivered to a secret government program known as Project Talent, a sub-project of the notorious MK Ultra program that was exposed in the mid-70s by the Church Committee after an attempt was made to destroy all records of this program. In fact, 20,000 documents remained, but they were only the tip of the iceberg. The program used severe trauma to split his personality